All right, so I actually have the tough task of getting you guys excited and engaged right after lunch, which is always hard. Let me figure out, I'm not sure how to get this. Oh, there we go. Like it was said, my name's Nupur. I'm the senior project manager at Rebuild by Design, and I really want to focus on the community approach to post-disaster rebuilding. And so what I'll do is that I'll walk you through what the Rebuild by Design competition was, the process that it encompassed that really made it so innovative. And seeing as I have a little bit of time, I'll actually go through one of the projects themselves that was actually one of the winning projects focused on Hunts Point in the Bronx, and talk a little bit about the health impacts of that proposal. So in October 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic region. We all know this. It impacted 24 different states. There was an unprecedented $65.7 billion in damages and economic loss. This was the second costliest storm in U.S. history, and there were emergency and major disaster declarations made in 13 different states. Over 650,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. And Hurricane Sandy really showed the interconnectedness between the physical and the social resilience. Instead of responding like this, or keep on responding like this actually is Center for American Progress report, and it really shows how much money we keep on throwing at these storms. We decided to respond with this. The Hurricane Sandy Task Force and HUD responded with a design-driven competition. Unlike other design competitions that focused on essentially pretty pictures and pie-in-the-sky ideas, Rebuild by Design focused on the co-creation and the co-definition of problems with real money at the end of it. So HUD at the beginning actually committed through their community development block grant funding that all of the winning proposals, all of the winning projects would actually have money tied at the end of it and would be implemented. So instead of having a design competition where there was a predefined problem and there was a request for proposals to actually respond to those problems with specific solutions, what the competition did was that it initially asked for a call for qualifications. And what it did was that it really asked for interdisciplinary teams. So how could teams actually create and organize themselves in the most innovative ways? And so what we found was that 148 teams actually applied with the knowledge that they would be working on the Sandy affected region and with no other information other than that, and really had to prove themselves and show that they were up to the task to do that. After 140 teams, 48 teams applied, 10 were actually selected. And those teams actually were tasked after they were selected to work with communities on the ground in the Sandy affected region to come up with not only what the problems were, but what the solutions were. And these solutions from the beginning were required to show community support on the ground. And was really required to show that the communities on the ground actually endorsed these projects, because these communities were the communities that were supposedly supposed to be protected by these projects. So we didn't do it alone. We had extremely valuable partners. We had the Municipal Art Society of New York that has a lot of experience in communities in New York City. The Van Allen Institute has a lot of experience in competitions, and specifically design competitions. The Regional Plan Association really took a regional approach and does that on a daily basis. And the NYU Institute for Public Knowledge really provide the research base. And I'll just take a minute and just share that, the Institute for Public Knowledge is actually headed up by Eric Kleinenberg, that wrote the seminal work Heat Wave, and really talked about the social connectedness or lack of social connectedness and how that actually affected the heat wave in Chicago and the deaths that occurred because of that. So having the Institute for Public Knowledge on the team was pretty invaluable. And then we had our governmental partners, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. These governments were actual partners. They were required to show up at meetings. They were required to show support in a lot of different ways throughout the year. And so for the year-long competition, we actually had 10 different teams working in this one region. These teams consisted of both architects as well as engineers, artists as well as scientists, urban designers alongside water experts. And they were required to look at architecture, they were required to look at the landscape, they were required to look at the urban design issues as well as the urban planning issues that were at play in the Sandy affected region. And they were really required to look at the whole entire region and have an understanding of what the interventions or the thoughts or the ideas that they had or would propose would affect the region as a whole, rather than just one specific place. So these teams looked at all scales and time during the competition, and the key to the Rebuild by Design competition was the collaboration with those key stakeholders on the ground. Built into the competition itself was what we called a research sabbatical. So the teams, as well as the communities, co-creating and co-defining for 3 months. And so I don't know, has anybody ever really been a part of a design competition or had anything? So usually what happens, yes, okay, so we've got one in the audience. Oh, two, okay. So usually what happens is that the problem, as I mentioned before, is already defined. And so to have the team selected and then to actually spend 3 months through the year of the competition to co-define the problem itself was something that actually had never been done before. And so the teams, along with the communities, along with a research advisory group, toured the entire region. And so they really went from Bridgeport, Connecticut, to Asbury Park, New Jersey, to Red Hook, New York, to really understand what were all of the issues and what were all of the effects of Hurricane Sandy. You know, some of the local mayors contributed to this research sabbatical, which was extremely rare in a lot of aspects. And there were design teams that were actually working in soup kitchens to get an understanding of what the communities had to face with and really what they had to struggle with post-Sandy. So after this, the teams just entered a 4-month collaborative design process. And so what did this mean? Again, it didn't mean that these teams really created those pictures and had a sort of community response meeting. It actually meant that these design teams created these comprehensive coalitions that not only had the design teams, but also had stakeholders that were place-based within each of the communities. They invested a significant amount of time to make sure that they had the right stakeholders at the table to really work alongside them, and they understood all of the previous plans and efforts in each of the communities. So it wasn't that they were just helicoptering in and really kind of coming in with an idea. They were actually required to look at all of the past plans, all of the past vision documents, really think about what was going on prior to Sandy and make sure that that was integrated or at least acknowledged for their final proposal. One thing that I also want to mention is that I keep on talking about this co-creation. Within the competition itself, at the end when they had to propose their projects, they were actually scored, these design teams were actually scored as to what their design was before community collaboration and what it was after, and how much it changed. And so having these design teams know that there was money at the end of it, and having these design teams know that they were literally being scored as to how much they were collaborating really was a game changer for this competition. So along with that, these design teams were required to create non-traditional events for their community collaboration. They really wanted to capture the broadest participation from these communities. So we've got a flyer here for the event in Hunts Point in the Bronx. And so rather than having I'll say stale public comment period or a community participation meeting, we actually had a slam bake, right? So Hunts Point actually is one of the major food distribution centers in the Bronx. And so it makes sense to actually have a cooking competition there and have judges actually decide on what food is the best, and actually then talk about what it meant for Hunts Point to be a food distribution center in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, they actually created a bike tour and had a discussion at the end of it, as well as during, to really understand how young people and youth engaged and either were interested or had an idea of what the future of Bridgeport, Connecticut looked like. For the Far Rockaways, it was really taking a commercial resiliency workshop and leveraging that to really talk about what the next steps would be. And the last one that I want to talk a little bit about is an event that happened in Asbury Park, New Jersey, which I actually don't have a flyer for, but Asbury Park, New Jersey is a short I'm sorry?
Get Bruce.
It's a shore community that actually, is heavily divided. And what this competition did was that it actually got communities to work together to create a parade from 2 different places within the neighborhood itself to come together, create a parade together, and then have a discussion and create what they thought the future of Asbury Park looked like. So just to sum up, the process itself led to collaborations with 535 different organizations, 64 different community events, 141 neighborhoods and cities, and 181 government agencies. And so, as I mentioned before, it led to 10 different projects by these teams focusing on this one Northeast region. And so I'm going to highlight a couple of them. One of the most popular ones that actually was featured in the New York Times a couple weeks ago was this one here that was put together by the BIG team. And the question they were really trying to answer for Lower Manhattan is, how is a wall not a wall? And so what they did was that they engaged with multiple communities in the Lower Manhattan area to really think about how could they prevent walling off Manhattan, and how could this wall or this berm actually be a piece of infrastructure that actually responded to each of the communities. So the proposal that they created, actually in one area, this wall is a community public space. In another area, it's a bike path. In another area, it's actually a park. And so what they did was that they really took into account what each community wanted, as well as creating a comprehensive strategy for that area. This one here is actually the MIT and Zeus team for New Meadowlands, New Jersey. And their question was, how can they really turn the backyard to the front yard? The Meadowlands area is a couple of different towns and counties in New Jersey, all of them in which their back is facing the Meadowlands, this wetlands area. And so what they really wanted to figure out was, how can they get each of these communities, these towns, these mayors to really turn around and really look at this asset that is there. And so, their proposal proposed a berm that actually creates a mechanism for economic development and spurs new jobs, new housing, and really thinking about a regional park. But the picture here actually has a picture of a fish restaurant, which is, imagine sometime in the future that serves local meadowland fish, right? Something that they actually had not even thought about. Yeah. It'll happen. It'll happen. We've got a doubter in the audience, but it'll happen. So for Sasaki, for the Sasaki and Rutgers team, they really just fell in love with the Jersey Shore, and they really wanted to figure out what they could do, to really support one of the economic engines of that state. And so they created a comprehensive plan to really move the tourism inland towards the Pine Barrens, really taking off the pressure of rebuilding the shore itself, which essentially would be rebuilding in places that would be hit by a storm again in the future. This one here was actually put together by the OMA team, and what they did was that they actually really thought about Hoboken, New Jersey, which essentially in most storms functions as a bathtub. And so they really wanted to think about a comprehensive water strategy in which they could resist, delay, store, and discharge water in moments of crisis. And, out of the 10 teams, 6 of them were the winning proposals with $920 million in federal disaster funds. And so thinking about design competitions in general, and then thinking about this competition and how it was framed, it really leveraged federal funding towards the creation and co-creation of a lot of community visions. So I think I have a little bit of time, so I want to get a little deeper into one of the proposals itself. I want to look at the Hunts Point proposal that is entitled Lifelines. And I think that we've got a video, and so, yeah.
Where's there a community that is ready, that's done enough planning work, that has enough leadership, that they're ready to engage in a super fast track process like this so that you could really demonstrate what a true community-based resilience planning effort is like. And as we started to look into Hunts Point, because so many people pointed us in the direction of that community, we saw how well the existing plans aligned with the idea of an integrated flood protection system, and also just how much capacity and life there was there, and that it was coupled with this enormous regional vulnerability of the food center.
This is a lifeline to the region, and it's an infrastructure that has a huge footprint and an incredible amount of environmental impact on community. And what I think, Lifelines is as a proposal is it's saying that New York has to be able to take care of itself. We need to think about how industry and how community in a dense city like New York can live healthy, can live ecologically, and can be economically successful. So that's where we came up with a series of lifelines that are built on those principles of a working community and a working ecology and a working waterfront.
It is New York City's food supply. We have the Fulton Fish Market, we have the Crawford Market, which is our meat market, and we also have the produce market. And it houses a lot of our food for the city. So if that gets flooded, then it'll be a shortage.
How do we look at this industrial infrastructure in a more progressive way before disaster strikes, so that we're being proactive and preventative as opposed to merely reactive? How can we avoid being the Rockaways or Staten Island, where you had people die in their own homes?
In other neighborhoods of New York City, the waterfront is some place that you go to and you visit and you enjoy. The South Bronx has got a fantastic view. I look out my window, this is a beautiful, outstanding view if people were able to use it and people were able to enjoy it. Unfortunately, what you have at the shore's edge are wastewater treatment plants, and there used to be some other very noxious facilities.
We spent a lot of time in Hunts Point looking along the water's edge, and when we were thinking about how we designed for this edge, that it's not just protection, but that we can actually restore some of the ecology to the river and to give some room to the river to restore some tidal dynamics.
Hunts Point is the poor zip code east of the Mississippi, and the need for services for social, emotional, academic, and everything in between is no greater than it is here in Hunts Point.
The Bronx River has very slow energy, it has mud flats, it's got a very shallow depth except for the navigable channel. It's the place where all of these oyster reefs and habitat projects have really worked well. It's a place where you can kayak and sail because the water energy is not too high. So you can get out on that surface. You have blue space instead of just green space. And so a lot of the levee is about having features like the boathouse and a kayak launch and all of these things that allow people to get out into that park space that's much bigger than the Greenway. The Levee Lab is an idea about experimenting with all of the materials of the working waterfront.
We're looked at as the breadbasket. So we get tons of food that comes to this community, but we don't have access to that food.
There should be the Hunts Point open market. There is a lot of security, insecurity for good reason, but we needed an open market that the neighborhood could come to, and that people as a whole New Yorkers could come to, see this open platform.
We want to make this a go-to destination, because I think if this becomes a go-to destination, not just us, but even meat and produce will benefit from it. If this is going to be where the food is, then this is where the people should be.
As this levee protection comes in, it needs to set the stage for actually allowing the industry to open itself up a little bit And one of the ways that we saw it here was this fish market that would be right here, where you could get the freshest seafood in all of New York. We're not just trying to protect it. We need to have it online when disaster strikes.
When Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy, whatever you want to call it, hit New York, we had damages, but this area was spared because we were at low tide. Had we been at high tide, we would have been underwater. And this market supplied at its time of need New York City and its residents. We were able to gather strength here, and people volunteered, and merchants stepped up to the plate. We were able to supply people in need with food the first day after the storm. And we would not have been able to do it if we were underwater, if our trucks had been damaged, if our facilities had been damaged. We would have not been able to receive the products from the growers to do it. And we supplied Long Beach, Rockaway, Staten Island, New Jersey, Hoboken. We had trucks as far south as Seaside Heights, sending produce, sending actually things you don't need to cook, because that was the whole idea. We need oranges, apples, tangerines, things that people who were out of their houses, who had no place to live, could eat.
When we look between these two issues of providing an emergency transport program, our marine highways are easier to keep up and running. They're a backup plan for when we need to have access to food distribution across Manhattan and through into all the boroughs. We looked at actually an energy project that would make sure that there's backup energy when the whole grid goes down, and also this comprehensive microgrid program where we could develop a tri-gen energy plant that would recycle heat waste energy, that would work with a cleaner fuel source, and that would make sure that the markets actually have lower energy bills.
When a truck killed a little girl in 1996, called her name was Crystal Vargas, and after that, Mothers on the Move became very involved, especially since there was trucks coming in and out of Hunts Point, and a lot of the trucks were also going through the residential area, and that was a big concern of the members of the organization. And then they started talking to members, to people in the community, and they started seeing that a lot of those trucks were also triggering the asthma.
Besides rerouting trucks and trying to get more offline with a good energy program, we're also looking at ways to mitigate the air quality in a way that is also really beneficial for the community. So you can use the planted strips and all these different structures to actually reinforce the connections. Part of the resiliency of this neighborhood would be to have the local people be able to not only have the jobs and make a livable wage, but also to learn about how all these systems work.
I mean, the average medium income can certainly increase if more residents are working in the industrial zones.
Which one? It was at the time. It was, and I still said today. Yeah. It was the only affordable neighborhood that I could do my business. This is a very special place to start up a business because you also have access to everywhere and the tri-state area right from here.
One thing I will say about the market, that if you come in there and you show your work study, they will move you up. You know, I know a lot of my friends down there that was like porters, and now they foremen, some of them even salesmen.
I was born and raised in Hunts Point. I started as a porter, now I'm a foreman. This is one of the best decisions I've made. I love this job, and this is my future, working at Natal and Natal.
This is a community that 35 years ago was burning down around itself. Right, Howard Cosell said the Bronx is burning. Yep. You know, you had Jimmy Carter come here and walk through Charlotte Street, and people wrote this community off. Yep. And so I do this work because I'm inspired by the other folks who stayed around, yep, who put the fires out when other folks weren't doing it, who saved themselves when nobody else is willing to come through and save them. That makes these people fucking rock stars. Yeah, that we've invested in ourselves, and we deserve to be invested in, so that our kids have the potential to be innovators. I don't think that I'm necessarily special. I think that I've maybe had some resources and experience that people in this community haven't had, and it's made all the difference, and it's made me be able to be crazy enough and arrogant enough and entitled enough to do this. We need more of that in our community, because if we don't get that, that light that we have is gonna go out. And so I don't want this community to be revitalized through gentrification. I want this community to be revitalized through the sheer spirit and the legacy of resiliency that it's shown over the last 40 years.
So I think we also have another presentation, but so there's just a couple of things that I just want to highlight in that video, just to make sure that you take away with those, you walk away with those pieces. One of them is that they mentioned that the South Bronx is actually the poorest congressional district in the U.S. It has the highest rate of asthma in New York City. It's actually the PDF. But it's also the key to the food supply in New York City and New Jersey and parts of Connecticut. So, you know, a large percentage of the food that actually goes to, yeah, this is perfect. A large supply of the food that goes through Hunts Point then ends up in the majority of the grocery stores, the push carts, the corner stores, and yet the South Bronx is a food desert. So what this project was able to do, and what this proposal actually addressed, was the fact that the Hunts Point area was not necessarily ravaged by Hurricane Sandy in a way that you saw on TV in terms of like the Rockaways or other places like that. But it really brought to light the vulnerabilities that, if it had, what would have happened to the entire food supply chain in New York City, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And it also leveraged the fact that there was a large community in the South Bronx area that was largely ignored, which the young woman from the BLK project talked about. I'm gonna just pop through these because I think we have some time. So as it mentioned in the video, so the Penn team actually really focused on the work of Mindy Fullylove that we talked about a little bit earlier, who wrote the book Root Shock. And she actually talked a lot about what the psychological effects of displacement are and could be. And so because she was part of the research advisory group during the research stage, the Penn team that designed this proposal really decided that the proposal that they were going to put forth would not only make sure that this community would be addressed in terms of the issues that they had, but that they would be able to stay within that community. So when you look through the proposal itself, and I'm just going to click through a couple of these, what you can see is that it actually focuses on the, a little too fast, yeah. I'm sorry, I have a hard stop at 3, so I want to make sure you guys get all the information, but I also got to make my trade. But so, I mean, so essentially what it meant was that the Penn team actually spent time really thinking about how they could protect the region in the event of the next storm, but really think about how the proposal itself, in terms of the construction of it, could be created in a hyper-local way. So what materials could actually be created in the South Bronx area? What types of construction would actually employ the local community themselves? So it wasn't just a proposal that focused on an idea that would be constructed by individuals that didn't necessarily have ties with the area, but that it was actually not only co-created in terms of the proposal itself, but actually co-constructed. So they mentioned this in the video as well, that 25% of the school children in Hunts Point have asthma. This is the large reason for this is because of the 15 to 20,000 trucks that go through the Hunts Point area on a weekly basis because of the food distribution center. And so really, the focus on this proposal was not only the food supply designed to really make sure that it was kept online, but it was really thinking about the idea of a mutual prosperity plan. And I actually think that, the community itself, without actually saying it, they were really talking about the social determinants of health, right? They were talking about all of the things in terms of, and let me see if I can find the slide that actually, these are some of the community meetings, the coalition that they built. the way that they developed the program itself and the design. This is a slide that I'm looking for. So the Lifelines itself had 4 different pieces, and number 1 and number 4, the integrated flood protection, the maritime supply chain, I mean, that's the hard infrastructure of it. But when you look at number 2 and number 3, that really is talking about the jobs. That's talking about the access to open space. That's talking about the mobility and the safe passage for residents in the neighborhood itself to actually interact and engage with the community around them and not have the trucks and those highways actually take control. And so I think I'll stop there because I want to have some time that we can actually talk about it. But I think the biggest takeaway that I really want to emphasize here is that because of the competition itself, it allowed for the space and place for communities themselves to co-create. And communities themselves, actually, and we've talked about this in the Detroit panel as well, they not only know the problems themselves, but they actually know the solutions. And really what it requires is, whether it's a competition, whether it's a structure in that way, to really not only highlight those voices, but actually have them lead the design and the proposals themselves. So I have a ton of other slides, but I'll leave it at that.